think we will get started. Hopefully some more people will join on as we get going, and then in the questions period, we can catch them up to speed on what they missed. I unfortunately am going to turn off my camera. I'm located in Bancroft, and sometimes my internet isn't the best, so I think it will be probably a little bit more smooth if I stop my video, but I will turn it on again for the questions period so that you can feel like you're looking at a face in person. So hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our annual spring landowner workshop, especially on such a hot night. I was just saying to Jim and Cheyenne before we started that it's very, very warm in my house. I'm a little bit sweaty. So we hope that the presentations tonight will be informative and participants will gain useful information for programs to help them with their property management. My name is Natalie Heyblom. I am a registered professional forester. I work part-time with Forest Ontario, and then I also work part-time as a private consultant. With us here today, we also have Jim Hendry, who is also a registered professional forester and a consultant as well, who works as a field advisor for Forest Ontario. And then we have Cheyenne Brunet, who is a forestry technician with South Nation Conservation Authority. Cheyenne is also on track to receive her professional forestry designation very shortly, which is very exciting. So congratulations, Cheyenne. And I hope I can click through this smoothly. Okay. So I am going to kick off our presentations this evening with a slideshow outlining the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program. Please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box. I think there is also another box specifically for questions, so we will make sure to monitor both of them. At the end of the three presentations, we will read and answer your questions. We'll also be sending a short survey in the chat box at the end of the workshop. I believe that it comes up when the webinar itself ends, but I'm going to send it in the chat box at the end, just in case there's a little bit of a glitch. If you could take a moment to fill it out, that would be very much appreciated. It's always great to get feedback. In this talk, we will be covering an overview of the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program, which I will be referring to as MFPA from here forward because that's quite a mouthful. We'll talk about the eligibility of the program, how the application process works, the program specifics, and finally some management options. So the MFPA is a voluntary program where landowners who choose to enroll their property as a managed forest can save up to 75% of their forested property taxes. And when I say forested property taxes, this means the land that is deemed eligible underneath the program parameters. So while the tax benefits of the program are typically a very big selling point to landowners for obvious reasons, there are other positive outcomes of enrolling your property into the MFPA. Your stewardship plan will help you learn more about your woodlot by going through the processes of understanding your tree and plant species, forest types, and general overall health. In addition, the stewardship plan will help you create a solid direction for meeting any objectives that you have. Landowners often find it easier to reach their objectives with their properties when they have a timeline set with specific management activities. And of course, by setting these long-term objectives and committing to practicing good forestry, you're ensuring the long-term health of your woodlot. So to be eligible for the program, landowners must meet certain criteria. The property in which you wish to enroll must have a minimum of 4 hectares, which is equivalent to 9.88 acres if you prefer, of forested land. This must be on a single roll number. So this doesn't mean that there can only be one roll number per plan. If you own several properties that you want to put onto one plan in the MFPA, that's totally fine. Just each property with its own roll number must meet the minimum area requirements. Another criteria is that the landowner must be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. If a corporation or a partnership owns the property, it also must be Canadian. In addition, you must have a minimum of 400 trees per acre in the eligible forested region. This is inclusive of seedlings. A lot of people think that this has to mean great big tall trees, but if you've just done a plant, that's totally fine, all included. And then finally, trusts and conservation authorities are also eligible. The very first step in applying for the MFTIP, of course, is determining if you are eligible. This can be pretty tricky if you know you own enough acres but are unsure if the land itself is eligible, because I'm sure what I just described, maybe some of you are like, not sure. So sourcing a managed forest plan approver can help to ensure that your property is in fact eligible before moving forward, because you wouldn't want to put in all this work and find out you're not eligible. Managed forest plan approvers, or MFPAs, can easily be found at the link posted here on the screen. When you type in this link, it'll take you to a web page, and then under that first text there, you can see in this picture, there's a search bar where you can either search an MFPA's name or search for an MFPA by the county. In my opinion, searching by county is particularly helpful because it narrows your search to the applicable region. I think that most people find that when looking for an MFPA, they're much more likely to help you out if they're within an hour drive of where you live, or where your property is rather. So alternatively, you can scroll through the list below that's on the website. So if you kind of think of these two pictures together, that picture on the previous slide would just be above this one on the website. You can see the name of the approver, the location, as well as their contact information. Your next step would be to either email the email they provided or call the number listed. You may need to call a few before you find someone available to help. I've heard this is pretty common, especially depending on the time of year. Late spring and early summer are particularly very busy for MFPAs, as the new plans are due for submission by June 31st, and the 10-year renewals are due by July 31st. So this time of year packs up pretty quickly. Your next step in the application process will be to prepare the management plan itself. The plan is for the term of 10 years and includes specific details on how you will manage your woodlot. This plan can either be prepared by yourself or by an MFPA. Regardless of whether you prepare your own plan or if an MFPA prepares your plan, you must be approved by an MFPA. Your plan must be approved by an MFPA rather. MFPAs are private contractors and are not staff of the MNRF, so pricing will vary depending on the consultant. So the MFPA must not only review your written plan, but also must complete a site visit to your property to assess and verify the details of your woodlot. A lot of landowners use this as an opportunity to go out with the MFPA. It could be a great learning opportunity to walk around your woodlot and see what you have. When the site visit and plan preparation have been completed, landowner must complete a 2-page application form. It's very simple, just a few boxes to fill in. This can be found on the MNRF website, or you can just ask your MFPA to provide a copy for you. I think probably every MFPA will have one of these files that they can very quickly hand off. In addition to your application form, you must locate a copy of your most recent tax bill or MPAC property assessment. Your MFPA will need both of these documents for your application submission. So you only need either or, you don't need both. So when they do the submission, they're going to have either your tax bill or your MPAC and your application that they will submit. It's also pretty important to note that one or the other should have your exact area on them. This is an important piece of information for the actual plan itself. Sometimes I found that neither had it, or they didn't have the MPAC assessment and the tax bill didn't have it on it, which sometimes happens. And then we had to go a long way through calling the municipality, which is fine. It's just much easier if you can locate that right off the bat. So the actual management plan must follow standard guidelines and include various required information. This includes 10 sections, and each section is designated for specific information on your woodlot. The landowner or MFPA have the option of either using a template that the MNRF can provide, or they can create a document from scratch. Creating a document from scratch is really popular among the MFPAs so that they can add their professional touch to the plan while following the required sections. Landowners who choose to write their own plan often follow the template because, of course, it already has all the information that you know you need to fill in. The first section of the management plan will have your name, address, and contact information, as well as the name, address, and contact information of your MFPA. Section 2 will have your property specifics, like your roll number, municipality, lot, concession, and area. Section 2 will also have your federal, provincial, local policies and regulations. Section 3 outlines the past activities of the property, which can really be anything from when the property was purchased to past logging or tree planting events. If you don't know this information, it doesn't have to be very beefy, but the more information, the better. Section 3 also includes information on the surrounding landscape, like if there are any major streams that flow through the property to big lakes, or if the property is a part of something like a large deer yard. Section 4 includes the very first map of the plan. This map is a general map of your property and the surrounding landscape. It typically should include nearby roads and other related natural features, like if you have a lake somewhat close to your property. Section 5 is a very important section. It includes your objectives for the woodlot. Often they are ranked from most important to least important and include really anything from recreation to forest products to investment. There must also be a short description to each objective. One of the very great things about this program is that there's a lot of variation to how you can manage your woodlot. It can range from something really as involved as a sustainable timber harvest to something as simple as monitoring the woodlot for health. And you really see all kinds with landowners. However, something important to note is that any and all management activities must be acceptable under the Good Forestry Practices Act. This act can easily be found online. If you find that you're looking for the act and you're having trouble locating it, you can either ask your MFPA to help you, or please feel free to reach out to me as well. I can help locating that document. Section 6 includes the second map of the plan. This map is a detailed compartment map of your property. Oftentimes the landowner or the MFPA or yourself will use an aerial photo for it so that you can see the changing landscape. It'll often sort of represent your wetlands, any boundaries you have between compartments. For example, if you have a mixed forest, a hardwood forest, and a conifer forest, that will need to be seen. We'll need to see residential buildings and any other important features that might be noted. Section 7 is your property value section. This section includes your upland compartment characteristics, history, and inventory, as well as the same information for wetlands and any other open areas. Oftentimes, landowners who choose to write their own plan will have help from the MFPA in this section. It just ensures that you're having someone who's pretty experienced looking for this information on your woodlot. This section is also where you can be specific on your objectives based on specific compartments. For example, if you knew you wanted to harvest the hardwoods. In addition, this is where you can also talk about the wildlife on your property, like important habitat or sightings. I find landowners always get excited. Well, maybe I just get excited about this section, but it's always fun to include pictures and specific instances. Our section 8 includes a schedule of activities for the next 10-year term. This provides specifics on meeting your management objectives. Section 9 is where you would keep record of your stewardship activities. If you start a new plan, this section would be blank with submission. But then at our 5-year progress report, which is mandatory to stay in the plan, you would of course fill in anything you've done in the past 5 years. And then also when you have to do a renewal after 10 years, this section would be filled in with your renewal submission. And then section 10 includes your references and any related contacts. This is great if you have an MFPA do it for you, because you can have these references for, let's say, tree markers, reputable loggers, planting delivery agents, all that type of thing in this section. So let's say you've decided to go through and put your forest under a managed forest. And you might be thinking, navigating how to manage your property under this program seems a little bit daunting, but there are programs that exist to assist you. So if you have open area on your property or space for some planted trees, the 50 Million Tree Program and also the over-the-counter tree sales program are just two amazing options to help you grow your forest. Jim and Cheyenne will get into the specifics of these programs in just a moment. And that concludes this segment. Thank you for listening to me. Once again, we will answer any questions at the end, and I will stop sharing and pass the baton on to Jim. If I can just bear with me, Jim. There we go.
Natalie, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Well, that's great, Natalie. Thanks for that. And hello, everyone. My presentation, I'll just get it up right now, and I'll do the same as well with Natalie. Once I get the presentation up, I'll probably take my video off just so that my bandwidth doesn't stall on us. Okay, or doesn't slow the presentation down. And okay, I'll check with Natalie. I'm looking at the first screen of my presentation. Is that what you're looking at?
Looks great, Jim. Looks like it should.
Okay, super. Okay, I'll have the video off. So again, welcome. Thank you for attending this virtual landowner workshop for the Forest Ontario. And the emphasis of my presentation will be on the 50 million tree program. But given that I have a captive audience, I'll just have 2 slides on 2 of the other programs, 2 of the 3 other programs that Forest Ontario offers. And that's the forest education and community engagement. And then the remaining of the presentation will be on tree planting. And that's what the emphasis on, but I think it's worth mentioning the other 2 pillars of our Forest Ontario program. So the first one that I would briefly like to talk about is forest education. We have a number of programs under that umbrella. The first one is links up forestry education to the curriculum, and that also includes K to 12, so our grade schools, and also postgraduate as well. So we have some good resources relative to that to get the message out about forestry, about sustainable management. We also have more classroom focused competitions or in classroom instructions. 2 of them that as an example would be Tree Bee, which is more geared towards the primary grades, and then focus on forest program as well. And there's also Envirothon as well. So those programs are more hands-on, and usually they require an instructor with resource management background, and it's sort of in a competition setting, so it's kind of fun for the kids. And then the third and final is a little bit more, I would say, ad hoc-ish. It's relates to students and parents and teachers relative to training and developing our future forest stewards. So there's some mentorship involved, and we also get registered professional foresters to go into schools and just talk about the industry and the opportunity, and so try to garner some interest relative to that with those groups. So the second pillar or program that Forest Ontario offers is also about community engagement. And in this, really what we're trying to engage the public in understanding the role that Ontario's forests play in Ontario's communities and relative to keeping them healthy and prosperous. So the value of forests, you could say, from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, and from an economic perspective. And so we have a number of initiatives under community engagement. We're involved in the Toronto Christmas market, reconciliation, First Nations reconciliation, community tree planting. It takes a forest signage. You may see those large signs, 4x8 signs, and they're just a single message around the value of forest, again, economic, social, and environmental. We also run a forestry or forest photo contest once a year, And then finally, we have a program known as the Heritage Trees. And this is about identifying large heritage trees throughout Ontario. And we register and the landowner gets a certificate identifying that. So back to tree planting. Our goal and has been for the past several years, since 2008, is that the programs that we undertake in tree planting aims to plant 3 million trees each year. And we have three main programs. The 50 million tree program. This is offered just in Ontario, and I'll talk more about that program. Natalie mentioned over the counter. So the 50 million tree program has specific guidelines, and those people that fall outside those guidelines, in most cases, landowners with small areas to plant, low numbers. We also have an over the counter, and there's some financial support for that as well. And then finally, from a national perspective, we have the Forestry, Forest Recovery Canada. This is a national program, and this is one where we work with corporate sponsors and plant trees in urban or in non-urban forests throughout Ontario. It's a smaller program than the 50 million tree program, but nonetheless, it's still important to look at a national level as well. So those are the three programs. So a bit more detail on the 50 million tree program, and of those three programs that I just mentioned, the 50 million tree program is our largest in terms of trees in the. So Forest Ontario is the lead agency in this particular program, but the but is that we work with partners right across the program to deliver right across the province to deliver this program. And our partners are essential to this program. There's two main partner groups. One are the nurseries that grow the trees, and the second one are the planting delivery agents. And we're going to be hearing from Cheyene Brunet from South Nation Conservation, and she'll give you more of the specifics of what the planting delivery agent does. So those are the three key components: Forest Ontario, the two partners, the nursery, and the planting delivery agents. The funding for this program, there's two main sources of funding. One is Natural Resources Canada. So this is a federally sponsored program. And then the difference, or no, I shouldn't say the difference, but in addition to, we also receive private and corporate donations that we funnel into this particular program. And that funding support then goes directly to the planting delivery agent and lowers the cost to the landowner. So what have we achieved to date? This does not account 2022 numbers. So we've worked with over 4,000 landowners, and when I say we, I mean the planting delivery agents and the nurseries and Forest Ontario. And this has been going on since 2008, and working on those private landowners' land. So a nice graphic showing the dots get really tight in here, and lots of overlap, and that's all good because those are all planting sites. Those aren't trees; those are planting sites. So if you look in Eastern Ontario around Ottawa, you can see it's very congested in terms of our planting success. Goes right across to Windsor, and then it goes up into Sault Ste. Marie, Sudbury, New Liskeard, Thunder Bay, Dryden, and so on. So again, those are private land. So we don't plant on Crown land with the 50 million tree program, just private land. I want to spend just a few moments on sort of the cycle of the program and how we collectively are involved in what the landowner sees, which is the seedlings in the ground. A lot happens before that, and a lot happens after that. So we are involved, Forest Ontario is involved in the seed and cone forecasting. In order to grow seedlings, you need seeds. And in order to have seeds, you have to do some forecasting. You have to find out where they are. And then you have to collect them. And why do we do this? It's very important to grow trees that are locally adapted to your property. And so we have to start that process by forecasting seed production in your area, collect them, and then grow them. And then we also have to develop a seed database to track them to ensure that you're getting locally sourced material and native material. The seed is then grown by another major partner, which are the nurseries. I'll list the nurseries in the next slide. And the nurseries grow them, keep track of obviously the numbers, the germination rates, the growth rates, and also the seed source. And then the landowner connection happens when the landowner applies for a tree planting program and begins that one-on-one relationship with the planting delivery agent local to their area. And with the landowner, with the planting delivery agent, they work together. Finally, the trees get in the ground, and then it doesn't stop there. That relationship usually blossoms into further advice by the planting delivery agent. Forest Ontario, in terms of the managing your new forest, we lead the provincial tree marking course. That sort of closes the cycle, right from seed to forest, and the involvement of everyone in the 50 million tree program in that particular cycle. So the next two slides, one will talk about the field advisor, that's myself and what I do, and the next one, the next couple will be about the planting delivery agent. So there are 3 field advisors in the province that work on a contractual basis for Forest Ontario. My area covers from roughly Belleville, maybe a little bit west of Belleville, through to the Ontario-Quebec border. And then we have another individual that covers sort of central Ontario, and one in southern Ontario. That position is vacant but will be filled soon. And then the third current field advisor is in the north and takes care of that particular area. So what do? We review your applications that you filled out on the website. Not necessarily all applications come through the website, but probably the majority do. And in reviewing that, we look at the eligibility, the correctness of the application, contact the landowner if that's required, and then forward it on to the appropriate planting delivery agent, basically the planting delivery agent in your area. We undertake field audits to ensure the quality of the stock and also the quality of the planting. And we also are involved in program quality control in terms of developing policies and procedures, provide technical advice and training to PDAs when required, and then program growth. There's always changes. Contractors may be leaving the business or coming in, and planting delivery agents may be leaving, and we want to bring in new ones. So we're always involved in program growth. And those are the few main categories of the responsibilities of a field advisor. Now, planting delivery agent, they're definitely the boots on the ground, and they have they develop the relationship with the landowner. I won't steal Cheyenne's thunder with all that they provide, but basically right from the landowner contact, the visit, the planning, the planting, any site prep and tending required, and monitoring. And any one of those points that I just mentioned, landowner involvement will vary, and I think Cheyenne will talk about that. And that's the person that you'll actually get to know and sign an agreement with. And how many are there? There are 54, I believe, if I did the math right, or 53. In Eastern Ontario, we have 9 planting delivery agents. Central Ontario, 14. Southern Ontario, far more diverse, smaller planting deliveries, but 24. And in the north, fewer planting deliveries, but cover a much larger area. Planting delivery agents can be conservation authorities. We have 2 municipalities that are involved in delivering a planting program. And they can also be private consultants operating on their own or in partnership with another consultant and so on. So it's quite diverse, but the approach is that we're all part of this one program and one set of standards. The other major partner that I mentioned earlier are the nurseries, the growing of the trees. And we have 4 agreements with nurseries. These are large seedling and in some cases sapling, in some cases potted stock nurseries. Ferguson Tree Nursery is situated in Kempville, so that's for the most part services Eastern Ontario planting programs. Pine Needle is in Pontypool, and that's just off the 401, and it's services more sort of the western part of Eastern Ontario and Central Ontario. Somerville, which is located in Everett, and that's in the same situation, Southern Ontario and Central Ontario. And then PRT, which is up north in Dryden, and provides stock for the northern area. Not sure how my time is going, but I just have a few more slides left. So eligibility criteria. So the landowner must be interested, must have space for at least 500 trees to 2,000 trees. Now I say that because in the guidelines for the 50 million tree, it basically says 500 trees. But some planting delivery agents will only plant for areas that require a minimum of 2,000. So there is some variability there. I think in most cases, most of them provide service right down to 500 trees, but there are some, especially in Eastern Ontario, 2 that come to mind, that only will go for 2,000 trees. The land that you wish to plant must be suitable for trees. So even though it may not have trees on it, it may actually not be suitable. Shallow soil, very wet conditions. So if yourself are going to invest money, if we're going to invest money, we want to make sure that that is suitable for trees. The land must be open. And what I mean by open, few or no trees. And that is referred to as afforestation. There can be some shrubs and there can be a few trees, but generally speaking, open land is what we want to plant. Having said that, we do get involved in a forest recovery, which is sites that are impacted by climate change. The recent storm that we had, the windstorm we had, or ice storm damage, or emerald ash borer, where the forest cover is decimated, almost removed, and so we get involved in that. And then finally, the planting stock must meet standards. Now, that's not something that the landowners necessarily controls or that's really a requirement or eligibility for us to plant the trees on your site. And we work with the nurseries to make sure that the stock it meets minimum standards. Types of tree planting. I mentioned afforestation. So afforestation is planting trees on open land, just an FYI. Reforestation is planting trees where trees are already there. And we may plant trees in shelter wood or just after a recent harvest. And that's reforestation, but we're involved in afforestation. The type of planting that can happen on your land, it can be windbreaks. So 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of trees around a field or along a field to break down the wind to conserve soil. We get involved in that. They could be rows of trees around streams, temporary streams, permanent streams, wetland areas, and that's for riparian habitat. And we've got involved in that. Also here, it doesn't say block, but afforestation is meant to be in block areas, large areas. So we get involved in that as well. And then, as I said, climate change, forest restoration. The other point I want to make on this slide is that we work with individual private landowners, corporations that are private, golf courses, and municipalities, and that's also private land as well. So trees go on all private land, but not just the individual private landowners. So it's a very broad program in that respect. If you're interested in our planting programs, you may know or know how to get a contact with a field advisor. Certainly, you'll have my contact information or a planting delivery agent in your area. What I would really suggest is that you either call Forest Ontario or visit our website. And once you visit the website with the address right there, you'll also see the application. The application is fairly straightforward. You know, where do you live? Where is the property? How big is the property? How much land would you like to plant? And some of the reasons for planting the trees. And those are really the questions that we ask in the application. And that then within Eastern Ontario, all those applications go to me, and then I do my job and start funneling them out to the different planting delivery agents. So it's fairly straightforward to get going and get started. Also, I start off with when I receive it, I'll contact the landowner, and a lot of them have follow-up questions. I try to deal with those before planting it on or passing it on to the planting delivery agent, just to sort of address any concerns that they may have. I'd like to thank you again for attending, and I look forward to the question period after the last presentation. So I'll stop my presentation, Cheyenne, and that'll give you a chance to turn yours on.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. Okay, I'll just get mine popped up here. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so hello, everyone. Thanks for that great introduction, Jim. I have to say that we are so fortunate in the province to have a program like the 50 Million Tree Program. It's really one of a kind. I've been working with the Forest Ontario program since I started the authority back in 2013, and it's been really interesting and great to see the program evolve and the program requirements change to allow a greater variety of projects to be eligible for the program. There we go. Okay, there we go. So like Jim mentioned, there's two main points of contact. The main one that most of the PDAs have is referral from Forest Ontario directly. But if you do know in your area who the PDA is, you can reach out to them directly. I get a lot of landowners, because I work for a conservation authority, that will send me or one of my colleagues an email that says, hey, I'm interested in planting trees. Can you tell me what might be available to me? And then we go from there. So those are the two main ways that landowners typically get in contact with us. So after we contact, or that landowners contact us, usually the first thing that I'm going to ask is, okay, where do you live? Because I'm going to do a desktop screen of the property if Jim didn't send that to me already. And what I'm going to do there is I'm going to look at the property boundaries. Do you have water courses, provincially significant wetlands, floodplains, things that might impact or could impact the planting site plan, the way we plant, and so forth. And then this also is when I'll either explain or I'll send you an email. All of our program requirements, our fee structures, so landowners have a clear understanding of what this project might cost, what we expect from the landowner before going on site. And I think it's also important to note that each PDA operates under the same program requirements, but might differ in how they implement projects and coordinate their program. So for the purpose of this presentation, I'll keep it at a high level, but also go into detail about how the program works and what you can typically expect, because like I said, the program's the same across the province, but how it gets implemented on every specific property or in different CAs might differ. So the purpose of the site visit is to determine the soil type, the drainage, and the vegetation cover. Site plan and recommendations are based on the site conditions, the area available, and the landowner's goals and objectives. And it does happen occasionally where we visit a site, you know, we've done the desktop screen and it just might not be suitable for the program. And so don't forget that there is the over-the-counter program available as well, which offers a per seedling subsidy for landowners to purchase trees to plant themselves on their property. And it's also important to note that PDAs plan projects a year in advance. So for example, I'll be visiting landowners this summer who won't have their trees planted until spring 2023. And oh, there we go. So the site plan, this is every project that is enrolled in the program will have a corresponding site plan and map. Each might look a little different in format, but has these general subsections included. The landowner objectives, so why are you planting trees? What do you hope to accomplish? What's the goal of the planting? And these things are good things to think about before you apply or before you have the PDA on site, because this will really help facilitate the planning process. The next part that's going to be included in your site plan is access, which is important to know for equipment, contractors, or staff. Does there need to be access for ATVs, trucks, tractors, etc.? And it's also important to have these noted on your maps so that, you know, if it's not the same, because especially with a conservation authority, we have a team of 3 or 4. So because I was there doing your site plan might not necessarily mean that I'm there coordinating the planting the day of. So keeping in mind the site plans have as much detail in there as possible. And then as well, there's going to be site preparation, prescription, trees to be planted, and all the things listed following that I'll go into a little bit more detail on the next slides. So site preparations, this one is a big one. I always say, you know, weather's going to play a big factor in how your seedlings survive, but a properly implemented and planned project is greatly going to increase the survival of your project. The site preparations that are recommended for your site depend on a variety of factors. And this is why having a PDA is so important, because they know what they're doing. So it's going to depend on what the site size is, the site conditions, vegetation, and also contractor and equipment availability. And this is a list of all the possible site preparation options there could potentially be depending on your area. So brush cutting, band spray, scribe, frost seed, or cover crop as we call it, a broadcast spray, tilling, and scalping. So this picture is from a site that we did that had a really heavy competition. So we had our contractor mow it, it was band sprayed and scribed, and then it was planted. And the goal of this was that the landowner wanted straight rows that were evenly spaced apart so that they could brush cut in between after we planted the trees. And this type of work also helps facilitate spring planting, since the rows in the planting area is already laid out when we show up. This here is an example of scalping work that was done. So basically a tractor, a piece of equipment that removes the top vegetation layer, providing a nice vegetation-free planting row. And this, depending, like I said, depending on the PDA, could be an option and is great for landowners who don't want spray on their property or who don't want a herbicide application. Another option is we have for sites that are coming out of agriculture or sites with bare soil is to plant a cover crop. Typically, it's white clover and barley to help control the weeds that might impede the site after it's retired. Ideally, this is done a year in advance, but can be done in the spring right before planting. So this photo here is a site that we got a couple of years in advance. It was owned by a municipality, so we had time to plan ahead. There wasn't a rush to get trees in. So we planted with white clover and a barley cover crop. We let it grow for a year. We mowed it in the fall. This was after a fall mow, and then we planted into this next spring. Your PDA will choose and order the most appropriate stock size for your site. They will be seedlings, ranging in height from 1/2 foot to 2 feet in height, depending on the stock size and the species. And the size and species can depend on availability as well. And I really do want to stress that, because with so many planting trees, we had to source from 3 of the 4 nurseries this spring to get all the trees that we wanted in the appropriate species and the appropriate size. So getting your orders in early is really important so that we can ensure you get the appropriate species for your site. So to this point, you've had your site visit, you have your site plan, your site's been prepared if needed, the PDA's ordered your stock, applied for funding, and now it's time to plant. The planting season is typically late April into May, and start dates really depend on the weather. We're fully subjective to the weather at this point, and when nurseries can lift their trees. And then after we get the trees, there is typically two methods of planting. One is hand planting, the other is machine planting. And the method chosen is based on the site size and conditions, and again, contractor availability in your area. So this year is an example of a machine planter. So it's an attachment that goes on the back of a tractor. These are typically reserved for larger sites or higher and drier sites, a site that you can get a tractor onto. We don't have this option in Eastern Ontario, and that's solely just because of contractor availability in our area. The other option is hand planting. This was a site that we did this past spring. It would have been perfect for machine planting, but we had our hand planters out there instead. Hand planting is also great for areas that you can't get a tractor into, smaller sites, uneven sites, rocky sites, riparian areas, and things like that. So you've had your trees planted. Now what? We have a couple options, or PDAs typically have a couple options. One is to do a spot spray post-plant. And basically what that is a circle application of herbicide applied around each tree using a backpack sprayer and a tree shield. And then there's also inter-row mowing. And in our case, this isn't a service that we offer, so any inter-row mowing completed post-plant is done by the landowner. Some PDAs have the ability at an additional charge or originally agreed upon in the site plan to provide these services to a landowner. So this is an example here of a site that was done. It came out of agriculture, it was planted in a cover crop, and then the landowner's done fairly extensive work to mow in between the rows for a number of years after. And survival assessments is required to be completed by the PDA in the fall. So this gets done in years 1, 2, and 5, or 2 and 5, depending on where your planting's located. And this assessment is just a small randomized sample that we do. We walk up and down the field in different areas to get a relative overall survival. Should your site fall below 60%, which is the threshold that Forest Ontario has set, there could potentially be opportunities for your PDA to apply for refill funding. This is on a project by project basis and is subject to funding availability. At the end of your site plan, there will be a financial breakdown, and the cost per seedling varies across the province. This project cost can be dependent on a variety of factors. So site access, size of projects, species and stock size. Is there a need for site prep, or what site prep intending is being done? There's some programs that have to run cost recovery. And sometimes there's also the opportunity for additional funding from outside sources or other programs. So the opportunity to partner the Forest Ontario program with another source of funding or another program. So this will be included, and it will basically show the whole cost of the project, the money Forest Ontario is putting forth, and then what the landowner contribution is, like I said, based on those number of factors. And like I mentioned, this is something that I like to explain to landowners before I do the site visit of what their potential cost could be, so that they know that and they have that information up front. The tree planting agreement will also be attached to your site plan. To be enrolled in the program, this is a requirement for every landowner. It's a 15-year agreement, and this template is provided to PDAs from Forest Ontario. There are some PDAs that have added a few extra clauses to suit their program in there, but generally they're typically all the same. And basically it's just an agreement that says, you know, you'll do your best to take care of the trees, and lays out the costs as well. And this is just a quick excerpt from the last page. there, but it's a 2 or 3 page document. And sometimes landowners ask for this up front when they know about the agreement so that they can read through it to make sure they're comfortable with it again. And landowner expectations and PDA expectations. I think this is some really important conversations that we have during the site visit, and that it's really important for landowners to communicate their expectations as well. So keeping clear and open lines and expectations from both parties, just so that there's no disappointment when the trees are planted, or after the project's done, of I was hoping something was going to be done this way, or this isn't how I thought it was going to turn out. So this is just a picture from a site that we did. It was a 3-row windbreak, 2 rows of conifer, a row of hardwoods. And, with early discussions about the site, the landowner has a really high deer population, and they were really worried that their hardwoods were going to get eaten. We don't want that from a PDA perspective either. So they actually went and purchased and installed some tubex to protect those trees. So this is an additional cost that some landowners incur. And again, just managing expectations, and this drastically increased the survival and growth of their hardwood. So that's something that could be an option as well. Like I mentioned, the landowner purchased these after the planting and installed them on their own. Equipment and ability to do post-plant tending by the landowner. And like I mentioned, some PDAs have the opportunity to do additional tending for the landowner. Here in Eastern Ontario, we don't. So anything done is what we call an in-kind contribution. So really the work, we plan the project, we plant the trees, we make sure everything was done properly. But follow-up tending is, aside from all those other factors, again, one of the greatest factors in how your tree seedlings will survive and how fast they'll grow. So this was an example, again, of a landowner that did fairly extensive post-plant tending on their own and had fantastic results at the end of year 5. I should have put in a picture to show you what they look like after. They were 6 or 8 feet tall, and I'm sure they would not have had that kind of growth had they not done this follow-up work. And then, like, we get a little bit of everything. So this is an example of a riparian area that was planted. It was mowed before it was planted. We planted the trees, we did a spot spray, and then the landowner just wasn't able to keep up with and wasn't able to do any follow-up tending. So the survival after this wasn't great. So again, with managing expectations, we had discussions with the landowner before we planted the trees of, if you don't do mowing, if you can't tend the site, this is potentially what could happen. Your survival will fall below 60%. And they had the expectations of, I know not every tree is going to survive. And they were okay with a 50% survival at the end of year 5, just because they knew, well, they had planned to, but then they weren't able to do any of the follow-up work. So this is an example of a site that we wouldn't go back and refill through the program at our recommendation. And the landowner was fine with that because we had those conversations ahead of time. So I think I kept it under the under the time cap. So yeah, that was just quickly sort of an overview of what you can expect, but your PDAs will go over all of this information with you in more detail, and it will really be dependent on your site, kind of what path they set forward to plan out and implement your project.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheyenne. That was great. And thank you, Jim, as well. 2 very, very great presentations. That concludes our presentations for this webinar. We'll move on to answering some questions. So please, if you had a question during any 3 of the topics, ask away in the, it looks like we have 2 questions in the question and answers box, but you can also ask in the chat box as well. I also got a question over email that I will address, but we will start with the first one here. If you aren't going to apply for the MFTIP, do you need to fill out the forms for this? So if this is asking if you're interested in the MFTIP or not interested in the MFTIP, but the other programs, of course not. The forms are just for the MFTIP alone. So if you have no interest in it, please don't go through anything. Our next question, I'll maybe direct this one to Jim. Several acres of my forest contain up to 60% ash trees, which have already begun to die from Asian ash borer damage. Are any of the programs you've described suitable for requesting this land?
The answer is yes, but there's a condition. So the specific program is the forest recovery part of the 50 million tree program, and that's as it relates to a forest that is severely impacted by climate change. Specific to this particular question, it's 60% ash and they're beginning to die. I couldn't estimate how many forests are like that, and we couldn't plant them all. So what we would look at in this particular case is a forest that is completely devastated by ash. The trees are all dead, and there's no natural regeneration of other species coming up, and that would be considered. So specific to that particular question, the answer would be we wouldn't have a program for that, but if the condition worsens, then yes, we would have that. I will say that not only specific to this question, but there is a incredibly high demand for tree planting right now. I think Cheyenne and all the other planting delivery agents will agree with that. We are planning now for planting in 2024, and in some cases 2025. The demand's so high, so we do have to prioritize. So first priority would be afforestation. Second priority would be forest recovery. So that's a long answer, but I think that question required a long answer.
Awesome, thank you, Jim. This next question here, I will direct to Cheyenne. Just to be clear, if a landowner does not do any aftercare in a tough site and you have this discussion with them, they may not be eligible for replacements.
In short, yes. So because funding is limited for refill sites, we again, like Jim mentioned, we have to prioritize sites that were planted. You know, the landowner did some tending, they failed for, you know, weather, drought, that kind of thing. So there is a priority. Yeah, in short, that's right.
Awesome, thanks, Cheyenne. We have another question here. I will answer this one. We were in the MFPA program, but were kicked out because we didn't know about the 5-year report. It's too bad. So hadn't submitted it. Would we be able to reapply? Yes, of course. If you're kicked out of the program, it's not an end all. Absolutely get in touch with even the same MFPA that you had before. If they're no longer writing plans, you can even feel free to reach out to me, and I can help you along with this process to get you back in, because absolutely. That was our questions for the question and answer box. And then we also had one come in over email. The question was essentially asking about locating nursery near the Schoolog area. And I quickly had to look it up while we were talking, but I think the closest one to you would be Pine Needle Farms, just for reference. I'm pretty sure that would be the closest, but hopefully from the nurseries listed today, you'd be able to do a quick search about the furthest one from where your property is. So I think that's it, unless someone is seeing a question that I'm not, Cheyenne and Jim. I think that we've answered them all. Before everyone signs off, I'm just going to copy the link into the chat box here of our survey. Please take a moment to fill this out. It should only take you maybe even a minute, and we really appreciate your feedback of today's webinar. And if there's nothing else, I think we will end it there. Thank you so much to everyone who came out. It's awesome to see landowners interested in programs to manage their property, and we really hope to hear from you all soon, hopefully in programs that we're offering. And thank you, Jim and Cheyenne, as well. Okay, everyone have a lovely night.